Welcome again to another episode of the AI Forecast, a weekly podcast sponsored by Cloudera that explores the past, present and future of enterprise AI with leading companies and industry experts, along with me, your host, Paul Muller. Now, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button so that you don't miss upcoming episodes. Well, on today's episode, I'm joined by co-author of Demystifying AI in the Enterprise, Jonas Christensen, to help us explore the challenges and opportunities that data professionals are faced with when introducing AI into the enterprise. For those of you who might not be familiar with his work, shock horror, Jonas is the head of innovation at consultancy SkillsGPT by day, and by night, he is the founder and host of the Leaders of Analytics podcast, co-author of not one but two books on AI and ML, most recently publishing Demystifying AI for the Enterprise, where he leverages his decades of experience in financial services to guide industry adoption of AI. Now, unsurprisingly, you'll also find him on stage as a keynote speaker at data science and analytics leadership conferences around the world. Welcome to the pod, Jonas Christensen.
What an intro, Paul. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me on here today. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you.
It's great to have you. Now, listeners will not realise unless they've done their homework on both of us beforehand, but we are recording this virtually, but we're literally about an hour's drive away from each other here in Australia by pure coincidence.
That's right. So an hour and a big bridge in the way. So it's still too far for us to do this in person, but the digital world allows us to do it just as well in this format. So all good.
Yeah, well, we have to work out how to catch up face to face. Now, before we get into the topic, we do something we call our Fast Four. It's a little bit of an opportunity to mentally and verbally limber up before we get into it. Chance for our audience to get to know you through a slightly different lens. Are you ready to play the game?
Yeah, sure. Let's have a go at it.
Beautiful. All right. First question for you. What would people say is your superpower, people who know you best?
The ability to see hidden trends, hidden insights in complex systems or complex problems.
And that comes through in the book, that's for certain. The most impactful technology of all time?
Well, this is one where you could pick real technologies that are completely human-made or pseudo-technologies. This discovery of fire is important. I don't know if that's a technology, but it forms the basis for us being able to consume much more protein so that our brains grew, thereby we're here today. The discovery of agriculture, but if I have to pick one much more recent and timely for us, it's AI is definitely up there, I think.
Well, I think I'll give you fire. You've written a book, so you're allowed to say anything you like. You're technically an expert now.
I should say that the technology of the written word is also pretty important in the evolution of mankind. So
Gutenberg, he was one of your people, wasn't he? No, he's close to one of your people. But
yeah, he was originally from Denmark. I'm sure we'll get to that. But just south of the border, there was a German coming up with the written word. Or the printing press, I should say.
The printed press. I was going to say the printed press.
Not the written word, the printing press.
Yes, he didn't invent writing, folks. No. You heard it here first. All right, what job or task would you like to see personally for you? You obviously talk about AI a lot, but for you personally, when you wake up in the morning, go to sleep at night, when you're in the middle of your day, what do you think to yourself, I can't wait for AI to automate this for me?
I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I've dumped most of it, and I would like AI to scroll for me and curate the whole thing and only tell me the three things I should look at. And that's what we should be done with then, and cut all the other stuff out. It's wasting too much of our time.
I think you might have just described TikTok, but minus the time wasting bit. All right, last but not least, what, and this question might not make sense, I'll elaborate for a second. Personally, professionally, I should say, I've found over the years there are certain almost tips and tricks that I use, just behaviors that I have when I interact with data that help me be a more successful executive. What tips and tricks have helped you when it comes to working with data?
That's a good question. I've developed probably a couple of mantras over my almost 20 years in this space. First as an analyst and then later as a senior leader in the space. when I manage teams, the two things I always say to them is, when you start, you must think like you're the CEO. Not act like you're the CEO necessarily, but you're the only people in this organization that have access to all this information, and you have the ability to go to the individual record, the minute detail, and also to aggregate it up to the full story. That's a superpower, so use it well. If you were the CEO and you were in this business and you had all the information to hand, what levers would you pull? That's how you should think. And the second mantra that I always harp on about is, before we can say that we're right about a conclusion, we must make sure we're not wrong, which is another way of saying you must validate your hypotheses, I suppose. Just because we can see a trend, we shouldn't say that correlation is the same as causation necessarily. And it is the data professional's finest job to make sure that that's the case for their own conclusions, but also to lead the organization into making valid decisions, not using something that underscores an existing narrative just because it meets what people already believe, pre-existing beliefs, but actually is a valid, tested hypothesis that we can measure.
So CEO mindset, and I suppose adopting a data scientist's view on data, that notion of being wary of confirmation bias, of framing a question properly, the null hypothesis, probably starting to sound a little bit nerdy here, but use those powers that, I guess, think about your data professionally. I mean, let's get onto that a little later potentially. Before we jump into the topic of, I guess, the book and some of your insights that you've gained, let's start with your background, especially for people who aren't familiar with you. How did you come to be where you are?
This starts to sound like a psychology session one. So this will be a long podcast if we start there. To touch quickly on that, I was born and raised in Denmark, which is in Northern Europe, a Scandinavian country. So I suppose my value set comes from there. What does that mean? In those cultures, we have a lot of trust in each other, and it's a way to structure a society where everyone puts in, and also there's not very hierarchical. So what you see is what you get. We say things as they are, and so on. So I think that's helped me in my career, but it's still been a journey. So when I finished high school, I thought life's been a bit too easy so far. It just sounds a bit weird. But I need a challenge, so I joined the army, and I was in the army for a few years in Denmark, and I ended up being stationed in the former Yugoslavia. There's a peacekeeping mission with NATO. I enjoyed it, but not enough to keep going in that career path. And I had this melody playing in my head of my accounting teacher's voice from high school saying, "You should definitely do this as a vocation, and you should go and study that at university." So I took that as a hint, and I started doing I think it's called a commerce degree or an economics degree, probably in English, or in Australia at least. I really enjoyed that. That was definitely the right thing for me, numeric, but also this sort of idea of seeing the detail in complex systems. So economics is quite interesting for that. During that time, applied for I sent off an unsolicited application to a bank. As it happens with those things, they sent me a letter back. At least they replied and said, and I paraphrase here, these were the exact words, but thank you, but we'll throw it in the bin. So I did the normal student thing and went and got a job at a pub as a bartender. And a week later, after I got that job, they called me in for an interview. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, I was working in this bank. That was as an analyst, and they taught me how to code and to wrangle large amounts of data. And that's when I saw the light, right? That's when I was studying accounting and finance at this time, and I was doing my master's degree in those disciplines. And I saw that the idea of having all these millions of rows of data and how powerful that was when you could combine that with the business mindset and the understanding of how the business works, which is for me was accounting and finance, the sort of the business language, and this combining it with the data language. So that ended up being my career. Here we are almost 2 decades later. I've worked in a multitude of industries with this stuff. So banking, finance, energy, what we call in Australia superannuation. So pension funds. I've had a couple of startups in this space. I've done an online startup, and all these skills have really helped me kind of see the detail and the big picture at the same time. That's that. Other than that, I have 2 kids, and I live in Melbourne, Australia. So that's the background, Paul.
I love it. And you've now got a podcast, which may not seem surprising to folks, but in your bio, you describe yourself as somebody who is by nature a little bit more introverted, a little bit more shy. So not only podcasting, writing a book, but being an international keynote speaker, you're living outside of your comfort zone, aren't you?
When I was an analyst, I often felt like I had all the right answers, and I felt like, it sounds a bit arrogant to say it, but I felt like the smartest person in the room quite often. And but I was too scared to speak up and say my mind and speak my mind. And I could see how that was limiting, because that's silly, right? That you're sitting there with the insights, the deep insights to help your colleagues, but you're a bit nervous and a bit not sure about how to speak up in crowds and so on. So for me, that was a big challenge to overcome. As you can see, what I do to learn is I set myself projects. I don't go and study necessarily. I've done that in the past, of course. But when I write books, I give my knowledge to the audience, but I also learn a heck of a lot doing that. When I do a podcast, it's the same thing. I spent 10 years in a public speaking club, and I started with really, really poor skills. In the end, I was the president of the club and had won several public speaking competitions in that. So this is in Toastmasters International, if you know that. It's a wonderful system that I encourage everyone to go into. But the point there is, by doing these things, you can see how you shouldn't be limited by what you can do today. It's really about what you can make yourself do later on. And that's something for me that have been wanting to teach others, and I do teach others through my own courses, and also courses I've facilitated at university level. And when I've coached and managed people, is this idea of the fundamental idea of, just because you are like this today doesn't mean that you can't be like that, what you're dreaming about, or achieve your biggest goals later on. But you got to put in the work, but there's always a stepping stone.
I think it's an incredibly inspiring story, and one I was hoping you'd share with the audience. It's not necessarily directly related to the topic of AI, but it is. I think for so many people who look at successful people, they assume that they were already there, that they came, out of the womb with all of these skills immediately, and to have someone who publicly acknowledges that they've had to work at it, I just think is inspiring, and hopefully gives people a sense of opportunity that they too can overcome their self-perceived limitations to achieve things that they want to.
And I tell the story of when I really got challenged in this space, and I felt a lot of anxiety when I was in larger rooms, often with executive CEOs and so on. And I did a lot of work on myself to figure out how do I make this my advantage. And I came up with 2 rules for myself, and this worked really well. So I tried to turn the negative into a positive. So I call these sweaty palms moments. Every time you're in a situation like that, you get sweaty palms. And I said, for a week to be good, for a week to be productive, for you to learn and grow, you must have 2 sweaty palms moments every week. And so the rule became that I had to seek this experience out rather than move away from it. The second rule I had was, once a week, you have to be the lowest paid person in the room. Now, I don't know what people's salaries were, but I could kind of look around and go, yeah, I'm probably the lowest paid person in here. And that's a proxy for people who've gone beyond where you are, who've learned more, who more experienced and all that stuff, and you being there and learning and soaking up the way that things happen in those environments. That was the magic, right? The magic just happened because my comfort zone expanded slowly. What was my learning zone became my comfort zone. What was my terror zone, which sits outside the learning zone. That's where you're really uncomfortable, fight or flight kind of energy in your body. What was my terror zone became my learning zone, and all of a sudden my comfort zone expanded. Now I have no fear of any of this, and I think of it often when I go into present in a board meeting or in front of the CEO and chairman of some company. It doesn't faze me anymore, and it used to faze me just to talk to one person who was 2 levels above me. So it's such a confidence builder when you break through something that you couldn't do like that, because it really shows you that anything's possible.
I love that story. So, related topic. What inspired you to write Demystifying AI in the Enterprise, and specifically, how does it contrast with the more technical kind of book? But let's just start with the inspiration for Demystifying AI in the Enterprise.
So what inspired us to write that book? Well, there's a lot about AI that needs to be demystified.
I was going to ask you, what needs to be demystified? I suppose that's everything.
That's the basics of it. And what needs to be demystified is, well, a number of things. But first of all, we're not talking about talking robots and flying cars and all these sorts of things today. We're talking about, when we talk about enterprise application of AI, something probably a little bit more mundane, potentially sometimes even bordering on the boring, because that really is what is the potential superpower at this point in time, at least, of AI is... It's about taking the robot or the robotic tasks out of the human, away from the human, so that we can be more human. Right? So the boring stuff. And since we wrote the book, we've had this proliferation of generative AI, especially OpenAI's ChatGPT and so on, that have come along and I think made this clearer to the layman because it has such a nice interface to it. The things that need to be demystified that we go through in the book is, first of all, we try to make AI more practical. So what is it? What are the different kinds of AIs? Deep learning, machine learning, systems that are automated and so on. But also that guiding through how do you projectize and how do you actually implement these systems in an organization? Because it's not something you just take off the shelf and put in. It's typically experimental in nature and iterative in nature. And the difficulty of doing that and the shift from traditional software to this software 2.0, which we also label it, is something that people have a hard time understanding. So if I dig a little bit into that in terms of what needs to be demystified around that. So if you think about traditional software, so the first since the mid-90s to 2015, 16, 17, 18, and now we have this AI revolution coming in. Software has changed the world, right? Software eats the world to some extent. Software is eating the world to some extent. But the thing about the traditional software is it's structured to be always giving the same output given the inputs.
It's Boolean.
You put A and B in and you get C out, right? And that's the way it has to be. And it's great. That's why we have the things. We have machines that can replicate the same activities over and over. Digital transactions between organizations, internet banking, and all this stuff. Because
let's be honest. I'd like the calculation for my bank balance to be deterministic. I'd hate to think that it could vary depending on the whims of the machine.
That's right. You don't want your bank transactions to be acting like ChatGPT and sometimes
creative.
You get something you don't like. I've taken $1 million out of your account and donated it to the Red Cross. I thought you might like that. AI is not that, right? AI is the output is variable. It depends on the input, and the input data is part of the code. This is a subtlety to some people, but it makes a whole lot of difference. And it means that it's an unstable system. It requires a lot of resource to maintain and to watch over, and it's complex. It's cumbersome to implement, and it's a test and learn iterative approach. And I think it's hard for organizations often to appreciate that challenge and what that means in terms of resource allocations to put it in, and also for it to work ongoing, right? So if you go and buy Salesforce, that's complex to implement, but it does what it does, and you can count on it. If you go and buy an AI system, you can't necessarily count on it being the same output in 3 months as you can today, right? And
it's got more in common with a human employee than it does with a computer, in that you need to keep managing it.
And for enterprises, that can be hard to tackle for various reasons.
In looking at the book, the first couple of chapters are dedicated. Your co-author spends some time just explaining the various forms of AI and ML algorithms, some of the underlying technology, and look, I as a technologist and a business person, I knew this, but I suppose I hadn't really seen it condensed down to one point where it's almost overwhelming, the number of different algorithms there are, the number of different approaches that can be used to help somebody understand that depending on the type of problem, the type of data you have, you need to look at different techniques for dealing with that. I guess it's a long way of saying AI is not AI is not AI. How important is it for people to understand not just their business problem, but the tools that are available to them, I guess, to understand the technology?
I think in this day and age where a lot of companies talk about being data-driven, it's a necessity to understand what does that mean? What are the tools to apply the data-drivenness, if that's even a word, to actually apply this through, right? What's the vehicle to do these things through? If I use another discipline in a business, marketing, so you often hear organizations say, can we put some AI against that? And you guys do that, you do some AI. If you were an executive and you said, we need some marketing, just do some marketing. People could quickly challenge that. No, but we need to think about the detail of that. What type of marketing? Is it email marketing? Do we need to do advertising? Do we need to do radio or TV? Or do we need to do YouTube or TikTok? Or do we need social influencers? Or people can relate to that. They're the tools, the channels, right? Just like you have different channels of marketing or different applications of marketing, different tools. This is the same thing, but just in a more technical discipline. We should treat it with the same respect and interest, or level of knowledge. We should acquire the same level of knowledge, even though it's harder to actually really be able to apply it. So this is part of the demystifying for an organization, actually understanding this stuff. Right? So I often say to executives, for your organization to take advantage of this powerful technology, there are two things at a high level that need to come together. You need to be able to produce this analytical output, AI output. So you need to have the right skill sets to do that in your organization and technology. But you also need to be able to consume it, because if you produce it but you don't consume it, you might as well not produce it. And the consumption is done by, often in the beginning, by the staff in the organization, not necessarily its customers, because there's more effort and risk involved in that. So it often starts with somehow augmenting the in-house experience so that we also have a human in the loop. Right? Mm. And for those two things to meet, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in those things meeting and working. It requires a lot of the data professionals. So what skills they need to have to be able to make those ends meet, but it also requires the business to be able to consume it. So being able to consume analytical output, AI output, you need to understand how it works. You need to understand when it doesn't work and the pitfalls in it. You need to understand what does it mean when I get a result and how I interpret that. And you also need to understand the effort that requires to execute and develop something, right, so that you can do that. That's why you need these projects to have business subject matter expertise as well as the analytical technical expertise, right? The people who build it, and they need to come together, and it only works when all that meshes. That's the magic, and that's the hard bit, and that's what we're trying to demystify, that kind of value chain in this book.
One of the things you spend a lot of time in your chapter on, and I have to admit I haven't read all of the chapters in depth as much as I did the one that you co-authored, which, as you said, is focused on the financial services industry. But you do spend a lot of time focused on change management related topics. Why is that so important, and why is it so hard? And I guess maybe put differently, why do so many people get that wrong?
I read an article the other week talking about technology implementation, and it suggested that for every $1 you spend on the technology, you should spend $3 to $5 on change management. I thought that was interesting. I don't know if that's true, but I think it gives you a picture of, generally speaking, with technology implementations, what is actually the hard bit. Of course, it's hard to get all the bits and pieces connecting, the engineering part of it. But getting humans to behave differently, getting humans to learn a new skill set, getting people to adopt that new skill set, getting people to change their behaviors with that new skill set, getting people to grow further with that skill set, that takes a long time and a lot of effort on those pushing it, the change managers, but also on the receiving end to actually adopt all that stuff. So that's hard, and that's why it often doesn't get done, which is why a lot of projects don't achieve what they could have, because that bit doesn't get done because it's hard. I might give an example that I think of a lot now because I work a lot with generative AI at the moment. And I think it makes it clear to people because it's on everyone's mind and everyone's minds these days. And also people have probably played with it, so they've got a practical experience with it. So we're talking typically about ChatGPT-esque kind of implementations. So you see a lot of organizations right now rolling out Microsoft Copilot, which is a good tool, and it can help organizations. I was working with an organization recently. Their plan was to roll out Copilot to their whole staff base, and the goal was to get a 4% productivity increase by giving them this tool. There was some training, but very minimal training, and it's kind of up to people to figure out how they're going to do that. And so we revert to writing faster emails. We revert to transcribing meetings faster, and it feels way more productive because you're taking some of these menial tasks out, but there's so much value left on the table because we haven't put the effort into what could this really be, right? What could this actually be if we really put the effort into it? I know it's early days, but can be more ambitious with those things, but with more ambition comes a larger need for change management.
And you talk about this in the book, don't you, where you talk about Henry Ford and the example of give me a faster horse. Mm-hmm. How much of this is a failure of imagination? But, and I also need to ask the same question, are you also seeing an overreach, that is people assuming that this technology is going to be more than it is, that there's somehow a magic associated with it, and you've got, I guess you're caught between these two things, a failure of imagination on one side, but also over-ambition or a naive misunderstanding of this technology and failed and a failure to achieve outlandish expectations. Does the question make sense?
It does. And I think that comes back to change management again, because if you want to achieve outlandish results, you've got to put in outlandish effort in education and change management and leadership and setting a vision and baking it into your strategy. All this stuff that's not actually the AI. And this is what's hard, right? So let's spend $1 million on building this AI tool, and it's cool. And in some industries that works because you got the right people, but often it doesn't work because it doesn't get the adoption, or we run out of steam because it's an iterative process and people lose faith in it because it seems like we're just not getting there. It's a long process, because this is what happens often with these projects. You got to test and learn, and then finally it works as intended. Because again, an AI system, when you set it up, is fraught with variability. You got to learn where the biases are. You got to learn where its temperaments are. People today know about hallucination in ChatGPT. It's again a form of bias. Any AI has some sort of bias challenges baked in that you got to pick up and try and weed out, or at least monitor. So there's a lot of setup around it that people aren't used to from the traditional software world, perhaps. And so sometimes the time to result can be longer than expected, and the path to result can be unclear. If you haven't had AI demystified and you don't know that up front, it can seem like a waste of time and money.
One of the other things you talk about is You gave the example with marketing before, and I see this in businesses a lot. Sales aren't what they need to be. That's a marketing problem. Marketing, go fix it. Like they've got some magic ability to fix a business by themselves. We need AI and big data. Data professionals, fix it. As though, again, that the data people somehow have complete control, autonomy, and agency to solve these problems by themselves. Talk a little bit about that problem.
I often say to people, data science is a team sport. And if we don't play it as a team sport, it's still a team sport. We're just not going to win it in the same way. So what does that mean? Well, you have these technical people, data scientists in the middle that have the knowledge to build some sort of system that can perform tasks at a different level. But you need the subject matter expertise to be really strong so that it's applied the right way in the right detail.
I've got a couple of follow-up questions. So the first is then, I'm a data professional. I'm listening to this podcast. Hi, data professionals. And I'm thinking to myself, I feel like I'm getting stuck, but I can't articulate it. In your view, what's holding data professionals back from being the sort of data leader you've become?
I think there are three big umbrellas of skills that obviously break down into sub skills. For a data scientist or a data professional to be impactful, you got to have a really deep business and domain understanding of what the domain that you're working on, what that's about. Again, if we go back to the marketing analogy, the marketing team take a lot of time understanding what they're actually marketing and how the customer experience will feel and all this stuff. That's no different for the data scientist. You gotta really lean into the business and the business problem from your stakeholders' point of view, from the business end's point of view. And it sounds obvious when I say it, but a lot of people just want to get the requirements and then build the solution. No, you got to help make sure that they're the right requirements. We can build the most wonderful solutions to the wrong problems because we haven't spent enough time defining this up front. You need to spend a lot of time on that and a lot of effort. And at the end of the day, no one cares about what your model does, what it looks like inside. If you go to the CEO with this stuff, she'll say 4 words that matter to her. Show me the money. That's what it's about. All the other stuff is, that's how you got here. That's cool. But you got to have the ability to link it to a business application that's clear. Right? So defining the business problem up front and clearly linking it. Right? And actually only building a solution once we're really clear on what that looks like. You got to have visionary leadership, I think. So that means you got to have a vision for what you can do for this organization with this capability. And it's actually your job to convey that into the organization, to facilitate that conversation. I work with a lot of data professionals, and I've been that person myself. So I know what it's like to think like that and have made the mind shift. The business don't get data. They just don't get it. They don't understand how it is. And we'll never get there because they don't understand, which is true. They don't, but it's your job to make them understand. This is your job, right? This is your job to set the vision and to explain how that works. So you're a teacher, whether you like it or not. And that's that visionary leadership that you got to have. And then the skills that fit underneath are things like an ability to teach the right knowledge, an ability to convey that vision. Again, so public speaking is a really important subset of that communication, presentation skills, but they're a skill that link up to that broader outcome. The third category I've already talked about, which is the ability to create some change. So there's a lot of change management in this.
So I want to take a different tack on this question now. Let's imagine I'm a business person listening to this. Mm-hmm. You've written a book on ML with Python. A business person sitting there going, this AI stuff is just advanced statistics. I did that at university. What do I need all these data professionals for? I'll just do it myself. How would you respond to that statement?
Have
you ever been challenged?
No. I'm trying to imagine that. That hasn't happened.
Well, I bring it up because in your book, again, you talk about the idea that business people need to get more comfortable with this technology. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't go, you don't go to your Excel expert to develop a spreadsheet. Most decent execs can do it themselves. They've needed to develop that skill. Maybe a different way of looking at it is, do you see this just becoming part of how a business person does their day, or will the domain remain so specialized, which I guess will lead on to another question?
I think it works on a continuum. So if someone wants to have a go at that themselves and play with it and learn and build something, I don't mind. They've got to of course they've got to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, right? Which is where you're at the more difficult end of the spectrum. Just like you could get a lot of people to build something in Excel, but it's not the same forecasting model that finance could build. So I think there is a place for this citizen developer kind of space. Part of demystifying is also learning about getting to know what you don't know. Is it the Dunning-Kruger effect? I think that's called, right?
Yes, that's right.
You think you know something, but then you learn more about it and you go, wow, okay, I'm actually at the bottom of the of the big hill of knowledge. And that's really valuable to know, because then you know enough to go and ask better questions with those people.
With those domain experts.
So you want actually that's a part of success for an organization in the whole production consumption, that we can ask better questions of each other.
So you talked about 3 do's in terms of skills. So domain knowledge, visionary leadership, and creating and maintaining change. One of the don'ts that you highlight, and I just wanted to get your thoughts and reflections on this, is the over-rotation on perfection of both the technical stack and the quality of data. I think you highlight this in the book again, the number of projects where people have been building this Tower of Babel, as it were, and they never ever finished because technology has moved on by the time they get 2/3 of the way through their project. Do you want to reflect on that?
I think in my career, I've seen firsthand somewhere between $100 and $200 million of data warehousing, data management projects being more or less wasted because we're building Towers of Babylon, right? Because we're going, okay, what data do we want? All of it. When do we want it? Soon. What do we need it for? We don't know yet, but once we get it all in, we know. Okay, so we start right from the beginning and we work through with all the layers of sucking the data in from source systems, conforming it, transforming, and then landing it somewhere where it can be used for analytical consumption. It's frustrating for everyone because everyone's sitting there waiting at the consumption end, and the people pushing through there are not delivering business value, but it's coming soon.
Well said. So a pragmatism, stay focused with the business, as you say, stay integrated. It's not an island unto itself. It's part of the business, not next to the business. So to that end, the show's going out December 2024. The podcast is. What's it's the end of the year. You get a chance to have a prediction. What's your prediction for enterprise AI in 2025? What are we going to see, in your opinion?
So I think we'll start seeing a difference opening up between the companies that are doing what I just described and the ones that are taking advantage of generative AI at a basic level. So there's a lot of hype around generative AI, and we're coming sort of down over the peak of that hype cycle. And we're now into, okay, now we've got to show the real value. We can all imagine the vision, but let's actually start implementing this and seeing what it drives. And I think you'll start seeing an opening up between these different organizations that have different ambitions. So let me give you an example. So I gave you this example of this organization that gave everyone Copilot, and they're happy with the productivity uplift that they think they'll get from that. That's ambitious enough, because now people can do things faster, whatever that is. It's up to them to figure it out. I'm right now working with another organization it's actually in a restaurant business. So it's a chain of restaurants, a large enough organization that they have all the They've got probably 400 employees, and all the sort of typical functional areas in the business: marketing, finance, operations, etc. And they have looked at this and said, this has a chance to revolutionize every industry. How do we train our people to move up that value chain, so we give them the tools to amplify their skills? That's not just us giving them the tools. That's actually picking strategically, what should we work on? How do we solve key problems? So we've gone in with them and sat with them a workshop. What are the key things that their challenges in their business? Where do they want to get to in 5 years? What are the bottlenecks that are preventing them from doing that? And where could this technology be of help? And it's training them up to be able to understand at a different level how they can apply this. They're training their staff to actually be able to build some agents themselves, and then giving them the help to build really advanced agents. So the difference between these two organizations in a year or two is the first organization, they're way faster at writing good emails. The second organization, the people in that business, they will be managing their own little personal army of agents that are doing tasks for them while they sleep. And they will be able to amplify their impact, both in terms of the output, but also the quality of that output, because they free up time from doing to thinking, the stuff that only humans can do. So you can see how these things are, they're vastly different in outcome. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to imagine that. And I think you'll start seeing that in 2025 really take off, the people who invest versus not.
I'm very keen. So on that note, if people are thinking of investing more, what do you see as the biggest opportunity and conversely the most pressing challenge in the AI space?
I talk about here generative AI because I think it's the first time where it's really consumable by someone who's not an expert in that space. If we take ChatGPT as an example, they've done two things. They've built a fantastic model that sits underneath, right? That's fantastic. But they've built this user interface that's really easy to use. So we've got lots of fantastic data science tools out there that can build awesome models, but you need to be clever and very educated to use it. So the barrier to entry is so low. And therefore, often we look for, in businesses, these huge applications of AI. You got to have enough volume of activity so that there is a payback on that investment, the large investment in setting it up that you often need. It's got to be big enough that it makes sense. Generative AI is a one-to-one ratio, right? I give it to you, and you can become more productive as an individual. Mm-hmm. It's the unit economics of that is very different. So that's why I think it's so powerful for organizations to leverage to get something out of. But as an organization, think about how you make it strategic, not just do what everyone else is doing. So the point of what I was saying before with these two examples is one organization is going to get the same as everyone else. They're not going to get ahead of their competition. They're going to be the same. It's kind of like saying we're in 1995 and Windows 95 comes out. I don't know, you can probably remember that, but some listeners might be too young. That was a revolution, right? All of a sudden you can click on things in a different way and we had this little Windows menu come up the bottom and so on. Don't get me started on the paperclip that flew around, but it's another podcast episode. But everyone had it. So it's not a competitive advantage to have that. If you're just giving Copilot to your staff, you'll get a productivity uplift, but everyone has it. So it's not a competitive advantage. Think about how you do this well so that you actually create a break from those who aren't doing it. This is your opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think pointing AI and ML tools at your own proprietary data is where the real competitive advantage, I think, can get created because only you have access to that data.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us, Jonas. Congratulations on both the books. Congratulations on the podcast and on your new role. Make sure, for those of you who haven't already tuned into Leaders of Analytics, check out that podcast. It's absolutely fabulous. I also want to thank Cloudera for hosting and sponsoring another episode of the AI Forecast, Data and AI in the Cloud Era. And thank you for joining us. If you like what you've heard, you know what to do. Leave a rating. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another drop. And of course, if you've got any questions for our guests or feedback for future episodes, make sure to reach out to us via Cloudera on LinkedIn using the handle @Cloudera. With that, we'll see you next week.